Hello, today's discussion is about whether or not Notes app poetry can be qualified as real poetry or is it just our late night nonsensical scrabbles. Today I'll be discussing the nature of Notes app poetry, Insta poetry authors, and how it compares to poems of previous eras. So, what is Notes app poetry? The way I see Notes app poetry is that they're these short creative blurbs that are kind of written on the whim. They range from topics from love, grief, sadness, or nature, and they're usually easy to write because they're in the form of free verses. So, whether you're writing about how elephants act as a metaphor for your life, or the infamous pomegranates at 1 in the morning, the language of Notes app poetry is like very conversational. And conversely, real poetry has a strict meter and rhyme schemes. And I know that free verse has existed within poetry for a long time, but for the sake of this video, I'm gonna differentiate them this way since one of the main prominent characteristics of Notes app poetry is the fact that it's free verse. Critics of Insta poetry say that the content of its poems are easily digestible and meant for mass media, hence where Insta poetry came from, while real poetry takes time to decipher its underlying meanings. Dorr from Michigan Daily states how, even though these lazy three-line verses are uninteresting, unoriginal, unstructured, and a complete affront to literature, she finds beauty in their impermanence. There's this idea that since no one's gonna read my poetry anyways, who cares what I write in it because it's mine and it's my writing. It's the fact that it's authentic to yourself and unfiltered that makes it appealing to indulge in. Here's an excerpt straight from the confines of my Notes app. Like a wavering pad following the lily, an afterthought, that I have become. It's short and easy to understand, which is why it's relatable to many, but disliked by some because the fact that the poem is kind of giving you its meaning on a silver platter kind of removes the essence of what they believe to be this literary art. Easily digestible or indigestible, I believe the foundation of poetry has to at least be personal to said writer. And I believe Notes app poetry does fulfill this requirement. Maybe from a structural standpoint, Notes app poetry doesn't qualify as real poetry, but the emotions and the intentions and artistry are 100% present in both forms of art. Now I'll be discussing Insta poetry authors who have published their Notes app poetry. For my first poet, Eliza Grace, who's known for a specific poem, He Crew Too, We Both Crowed. The posted pages of her published book are often short 3 to 10 line poems with direct, digestible content. I quote from her book, The Shape of Absence. Quote, I couldn't have imagined I'd get older and you'd stay the same age. Unquote. That's it. That's the entire poem. Now, I bring this example not to dog on the author, but to discuss whether or not Notes app poetry should be published or should it just stay within our Instagram feeds and screenshots with friends. Of course, everything depends on context, but in general, Notes app poetry comes off as drafty, and people believe that your diary thoughts should not be commercialized, especially when many critics of poets like Eliza Grace and Rupi Kaur find their poems too simplistic and lacking any tangible emotional depth. Clark from the magazine Ex-Puritan describes this wave of Notes app poets as an aesthetic more than insightful writing. The selling of the aesthetic was actually pioneered by Tyler Knott Gregson, who would post his poetry typed on a typewriter online. His poems read, quote, I will miss you always, even in the moments when you are right beside me. Time has planted longing inside me, and I do not think it is a weed that will ever stop growing. Unquote. And authors like Rupi Kaur followed. Her lines like, quote, I am a museum full of art, but you had your eyes shut, unquote, come off as a simple observations, kind of like, well, yes moments. And that's kind of the nature of Insta poetry. It kind of hands off its explanation to the reader without prompting the reader to actually explore deeper on their own. And I don't believe that you can get a response like, oh, I never thought about it this way, unless you dig deeper into more complex figurative language. Now, I don't believe that every single poet needs to conform to classical writing and make their piece with literary devices, but there still needs to be some work in progress with some of these insta poets who are repackaging their emotions and their traumas into this very aesthetic heavy, substance lacking writing style before publishing it into an actual professional medium. And poetry, at the end of the day, poetry is poetry, even if it's bad. Yes, I do believe that Notes App Poetry is real poetry, despite one of its many criticisms on its structure. And on an unrelated or related note, don't use AI for your writing. It actually breaks my heart whenever I see like posts of a book being proved that it was written by AI, and some books even have like the literal AI prompt in its chapters. And whether or not you like Notes app poets or not, they still have a passion for writing, right? And they're not handing the reader some like regurgitated prompt that was probably trained by using the works of other poets and copying their writing styles. So yeah, even though some writing is bad writing, it's still a trillion times better than not writing at all, right? And something that AI doesn't have is the journey of a writer. You know, they don't get to experience what it's like to be 13 and discovering that you can express your emotions through this literary art. And you know, you just can't. And yeah, you can't replace writing by people with writing by AI more than you can replace not showering with water, like showering with Gatorade or something. Yeah. So, how does modern poetry compare to that of previous eras? There's infinitely many tropes within poetry, from the heartbroken lover girl to the man bound by societal restraints. The Cry of the Children by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, written in 1843, is a social justice poem that speaks on behalf of the dangerous nature of child labor in Britain, while Second Attempt Crossing by Javier Zamora, written in 2017, recounts his experience illegally crossing the border from El Salvador to the US and his fear of law enforcement. All of this to say that in the almost 200-year gap between these two works, it's fair to say that the topics and themes haven't changed so much that they're unrecognizable from one another, but only the way we present them. Not to say that Insta poetry has shaken the foundations of what poetry used to be, but the free verse and the lack of structure have thoroughly changed the narrative of our contemporary poetry. We're still talking about unrequited love, and we're still talking about trying to live our idealized lives, but there's this layer of pleasantness in newer contemporary works that we don't often see in older poems. The 12-point Playfair display font on the yellow paper speaks louder than the actual meaning of the poem. Like when we talk about how much impact a poem has on our culture and the values of our society, we often judge them based on like the material itself. Yet today's Insta poets and Notes app poetry kind of play up the aestheticism more than the actual writing, is what I'm trying to say. And yet, both modern and older works still represent our values and aspirations. And although the way we write is, 100% different, and the way that we present our poems are, drastically different from before, the thematics stay the same. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you made it to the end, I appreciate it. Ethan signing out.